Today is the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and the beginning of the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. This year marks the 30th anniversary of the 16 days of activism. Please join me in a minute's silence to mark the important anniversary of this United Nations campaign, which aims to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls in all its forms here in Scotland and around the world.
Well, so this video came out, I don't know, 25th of November, so a wee while ago now. But just that little bit there at the end where she referenced in all its forms, because, violence against women, this is something I've talked about before, pretty sure years ago. I've made videos on this. When you read into it, it's not just what you would think it was saying in the tin in terms of battering your spouse, who happens to be a woman, etc. No, it's not that. It's underrepresentation, it's misogyny, it's outdated stereotypes, it's catcalling. The list is endless. It's the exact same thing as what they've done with the term racism, and they've just expanded the goalposts to infinite possibilities now. And we're at a point now where microaggressions are rife in Scotland, so racism is potent even today. So how do we eradicate violence against women and girls in Scotland? Well, one of the suggestions that comes up time and time again through the plethora of videos that were unveiled throughout the course of the 16 days of activism, and that is that until we eradicate gender inequality, violence against women and girls will still persist. So they were trying to tie in literal domestic violence with outdated stereotypes and or underrepresentation and or gender inequality in general. It's just ridiculous nonsense. I'm sure I will probably get to playing some of the clips from the hours of footage. As I said, one of the reasons that I made a video on this as of yet is because there just was so much to go through. And me being me, instead of then deciding to plan a video out, I'm just doing it on the fly. So I would like to think that I would include things that really should be included, but who knows where I'll end up with this video. But one of the things that I really wanted to just touch upon first before I go any further though, was actually, I think this tweet summed it up perfectly. It says here that unequal pay, underrepresentation, unsafe streets, victim blaming, misogyny, men's violence against women are all caused by gender inequality. To end men's violence against women and girls, we must tackle its root cause, gender inequality. I mean, unequal pay, underrepresentation, and unsafe streets. Okay, well, the first two, maybe as opposed to the first three. What have the first two actually got to do with violence against women and girls? I'm sorry. Even it take violence against women and girls in its most literal form. What the fuck does unequal pay and or underrepresentation have to do with that at all? Well, this is what really was pissing me off through this. You could see right through an awful lot of what these women, and it was mainly women, but there was the odd absolute wet white man who took to the podium to spew shite, which I'll probably come on to. Beta Ben McPherson was probably the highlight for me. First time I've ever seen that homosexual angry. It was quite a humorous experience, I won't lie. But anyway, a lot of these feminists, and that's what they are in the Scottish Parliament. I mean, you will struggle to find one of these women who isn't a feminist, but they were using domestic violence, etc., and they were deliberately tying it in with things such as gender inequality as an excuse to promote, call for, and suggest further pushes towards, empowering girls, eradicating the stereotypes when they're young, pushing girls into the STEM, etc., because somehow that will eradicate domestic violence. And one thing that is a prominent theme throughout the entirety of the 16 days of activism and whatnot is the idea that it's a gendered issue, it's a male on woman issue, and the reason that it exists, and what I'm meaning by it is domestic violence in this instance, or men murdering women, it exists in and of itself because of gender inequality, outdated stereotypes. It's a problem with men and how they see women as beneath them, subordinate, etc. And that needs to change. We need to empower the women. We need to empower the girls. We need to re-educate the boys. Don't be that guy, as that fucking campaign was doing the rounds. But There's a few things that even I could pick apart with this sort of narrative that they presented here. And is that would only be even remotely believable if 100% of domestic violence cases was man on woman. But the fact that some women are the perpetrators and men are the victims completely blows this narrative out the water. If this idea that these things exist because men see women as beneath them, and it stems from when they're children, and boys see girls as beneath them, etc., and there's this power unbalance from very young because of the patriarchy, etc., explain to me how it ends up happening the other way around then. I don't get that. If we're taught from a very young age that women are beneath men, etc., and that's the way it has to stay, it's the status quo, and as a result some men think that they have power over women, how does it end up being the case that women are the perpetrators in some instances of domestic violence cases and men being the victims? You know, admittedly, it's not as much or as many cases as women being the victims and men being the perpetrators, but the point is it happens. What about lesbian couples? Because it's pretty rife in the lesbian community. that also blows the narrative out the water. Completely. But they love to focus on this being a gendered issue. This is man on woman. This is a woman's issue. Domestic violence is solely a woman's issue. If you're going to go down that route, then when we're talking about the drug death crisis, which is one of Scotland's shames, the SNP's shame, who's the main, or what sex is the main victim of that? Men. So should we be calling that a male crisis? A gendered crisis? A gendered problem that needs attention solely directed towards men? No, we can't do that. Fuck no. Can't do that. No. The mental health crisis, suicides and whatnot. Who is the majority of people that make up the suicides and the mental health crises in Scotland? Men. Are they gendered issues? No, of course not. Can't be doing that. No. But when it comes to this, it's all about the women's, you know? And then they also take into consideration when men have murdered women. And they try to imply that men are going out of their way to murder women purely because they're women. How the fuck do you know that? You don't know that? And more men are murdered every year than women. Men are more likely to be murdered than women in the streets, if I'm not mistaken. The last time I looked at the statistics, which admittedly was years ago, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. You know, women obviously are more likely to be sexually assaulted, but men are more likely to be murdered or assaulted physically. You know, so are men doing that to other men because they're men? Well, there's a man there, I don't like men. No. You know, I don't think it's as clear cut as that. A theory I've always had when it comes to things such as domestic violence is I think it's sexuality that plays a pivotal role in that. You know, or even murder, you could argue, I suppose. You know, if it was a gay guy, he's going to rape a guy, I would have thought. A gay guy is going to batter a man or his male partner, etc. But the idea, the assumption is that doesn't happen. No. It only happens to women because of how men view them, you know. So, anyway, as I was going through all these tweets, and I've just spent 8 minutes rambling and all that, fuck's sake, I hope I made my points there, because these are the sort of things that have been really pissing me off as I've listened to this nonsense, you know. But oh yeah. Well, I don't want to go too far ahead. You know, there's things that if I include, I'll say. But yeah, as a result of going through all these tweets and whatnot, and my God, there's quite a lot of them quoting people. I ended up coming across the Advisory Council for Women and Girls. It's been a long time since I made a video on them. That's one of the many advisory groups that Thin Lips has created since taking over after Alex Salmond. This farcical idea where she creates these little advisory groups, whether it's for the LGBT, I'm pretty sure she made one for them, whether it's for women and girls or feminism, etc., whether it's for climate justice or climate change. You know, it doesn't matter what part of society is geared towards. There's a fucking group, a council, a committee, independent of government apparently, despite the fact Thin Lips creates it. Thin Lips puts all the people in these positions. They all create recommendations, put them towards Sturgeon, and it's up to Sturgeon whether or not she wishes to implement them or for the government to implement them. And wouldn't you know, every single time recommendations via reports are put forth to her, she accepts them all. She's done it for years. And she did it with the 2020 recommendations that were put to her, and this was the 2021 circle jerk that the feminists all had, which was virtual because obviously the coof, as opposed to the year prior. But yeah, I haven't actually watched that much of it. I just seen Thin Lips with what appears to be a fucking mullet, or the beginnings of a mullet, early January at the beginning of this year, and I just thought, well, why not? And there's as good a time as any to start recording. So, 10 minutes to talk shite, but, you know, it is what it is. Yeah. And I should also point out as well, like, the reason for bringing them up is because, like, you know, it all ties in, all this feminist shit, which is rife in Scotland. This is another example, zero tolerance Scotland. What can you do to end men's violence against women and girls? We need to tackle the root cause, which is gender inequality. And one way we can do this is by combating gender stereotypes. Anything you do to question stereotypes makes a difference. Stop the stereotypes by not gendering books, play, toys and clothes. You know, this is for children, of course. See, this is what they do. They are already doing this in schools. First of all, it was LGBT, and it was in the T related, or that was the excuse, the cover. You know, some kids don't conform to the gender identities, so it's best not to impose gender identities and stereotypes. But realistically, it was always about the women's in the background. It's just a classic example. The feminists here just up front about it. But there's a common thread. You see this quite a lot. But it was so prominent through all the videos that the Scottish Parliament uploaded to their channel during the 16 days of activism. All these feminists, you know, 1 minute they're talking about domestic violence, and the next minute they're talking about underrepresentation. 1 minute they're talking about Sarah Everard and men murdering women because they're women and men are just men and are wired wrong, etc. And then the next minute they're talking about gender stereotypes. So what? It just appeared to me, it appears to me still, currently, as it did last time I was going for their shite a few years ago, they just used causes such as domestic violence or like genuinely horrible things that happen to women, not because they're solely women, but just because it happened to them, and they use it as an excuse to shoehorn in feminist bullshit. You know? It's no different to racial activists in Scotland, the anti-racists and whatnot. You know, there could be a fucking fire in Tesco's, and the likes of Jeff Palmer and Graham Campbell would trot on out to talk about the need to teach us about our historic involvement in the slave trade. You know, they're opportunists, is essentially what I'm trying to get at here. But anyway, so another ramble over.
The First Minister's National Advisory Council on Women and Girls was formed as a catalyst for change to address gender inequality by providing an independent voice to the First Minister. There has and continues to be outstanding work happening in Scotland on gender equality. And once again, and I say this at every session we have, a profound thanks to those women's organisations across Scotland for all the work that they do day in and day out. Now, the Advisory Council was not established to be a delivery body. We are an advisory council to the First Minister, and our focus is on the systemic change required to end gender equality. So the how of this report and recommendations is for government, parliament, public, private, third sector, all of us to collectively achieve as part of the National Performance Framework and Scotland's commitment to a wellbeing economy.
Speaking, of course, as if she knows already that Thin Lips is planning to accept every single one of her recommendations, which she did. And the National Performance Framework always gets a mention when it comes to this shit. Doesn't matter which group of oppressed people we're talking about. The National Performance Framework is in and around there somewhere. And, of course, that is just Sustainable Development Goals, Sustainable Development Regime, you know. It even says as much on the Scottish Government's own website when you go into the part regarding the National Performance Framework. It ties in all nice and neat. Because the premise of Scotland, apparently, in order to achieve the progressive utopia that's been laid out for us, is Scotland's future is essentially laid out in outcomes, and they will all be achieved interdependently, quote unquote. You know, we're working towards the outcomes. And that's the National Performance Framework. The National Performance Framework outcomes are identical to the Sustainable Development Goals. And one of the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, is gender equality. Hence the constant push for fucking feminism in Scotland. You know. And then she mentions a wellbeing economy. Well, of course, you know. fuck your GDP, you know, we're gonna have a socially just and equitable world. You know, full of global citizens. Full of BAMEs. Beautiful BAMEs. New Scouts. Who are here specifically to repopulate. Because all our girls have been empowered. Anyway.
Thanks very much, Louise, and hello to everybody watching. It's great to be with you for today's event. And let me say I'm really pleased that this event's been able to go ahead today in this format. When we last gathered together in January last year, I don't think any of us, including me, could have even begun to imagine the year ahead that we had in store. So let me begin today by thanking the Council, the wider circle, and everyone else for all of your efforts over the past year in what has been an extremely challenging time. I'm very grateful to all of you, given the circumstances that you have been working under. You know, for 10 months now, COVID has quite literally transformed almost every aspect of our lives. And that's true for every single one of us. But we know that not everybody has been affected by the pandemic in the same ways or to the same extent. And as your latest report points out, COVID has both exposed and undoubtedly exacerbated so many of the inequalities that exist in our society, and that definitely includes gender inequality. And in doing that, it has also underlined why it is so important that we take urgent action to tackle these issues head on. In fact, the pandemic has reinforced the value of so many of the Council's earlier recommendations. For example, the Council has previously suggested improvements to the ways in which we support victims of sexual violence and domestic abuse. And there's no doubt at all that the pandemic has emphasised once again just how important that is. We know that women and girls who are subject to domestic abuse...
So are men. So are men. I mean, it would not kill them to just mention that fact. Why do they have to make it a gendered issue specifically for girls and women? Because in doing so, it allows them to justify the policies that come in the back of it. Hence what I was talking about earlier, the shoehorning other shit. This is not just an issue that affects women. This affects men too. And then, of course, you take a back step, I should say, and you take a step away from the concept of violence against women and girls, and then you deconstruct it, and you realise that there's a plethora of different examples as to what makes up that said violence against women and girls. And catcalling and misogyny and underrepresentation and gender inequality, etc., are also apparently factors that can be considered violence against women and girls. But they'll always go to the most extreme when it comes to trying to make a concrete point, such as domestic violence. But just bear that in mind, that's not just what they're fucking talking about when they mention violence against women and girls. Unless they mention it specifically, you know, in this instance, potentially domestic violence. But 9 times out of 10, that's not what they do.
Are far more likely right now to be feeling isolated and vulnerable, indeed to be isolated and vulnerable. And there are indications that domestic abuse may have risen over the course of the pandemic. That's why the Scottish Government has provided additional support for women's aid organisations.
Not one shall remain,
Crisis Scotland and Scottish Women's Aid, for example. And it's also why we are continuing to take significant longer-term action on the issue of violence against women.
There we go.
In November, we announced a new working group, which is led by a member of this council, Baroness Helena Kennedy, to consider the creation of a standalone criminal offence of misogyny.
You see this? This is another example of why these feminists, including this bitch, are exactly that, pieces of shit. You know, there was a few people in the 16 Days of Activism videos on the Scottish Parliament's website, YouTube channel, sorry, who all made reference to this very point here, where they bring up the potential for a misogyny-only law in Scotland as a hate crime, essentially. Now, when the hate crime bill was first put forth, I don't think it's actually been implemented completely yet into Scots law, but sex was a protected characteristic. But sex included men and women. And the feminists didn't like that. The feminists did not want misandry to be included, so sex was wiped off completely, and they pressed on ahead with the other protected characteristics. And to quell the problem with misogyny not being in the hate crime bill, and the feminists were very upset about that because, they didn't want to be out of a job, but they also wanted to be protected because they were oppressed. So what was suggested would be that they would think about, or they would put an advisory type group together to find out whether or not a standalone offence for misogyny could be added in at a later date, because that's gender equality. We can't have sex on the bill because that includes misandry, but we can have a specific hate crime protection for the women's. This thin-lipped fucking bitch, I swear, honestly. Anyway.
In Scots law. And that stems very directly from a key proposal in your first year report. And then just last month, the Forensic Medical Services Act was passed unanimously in the Scottish Parliament. That legislation ensures that victims of rape and sexual assault are able to access forensic medical examination without first making a report to the police. And again, that fulfills some of your key recommendations. Of course, the Council's first year report also focused on the importance of childcare and better support for women in the labour market. And again, the pandemic has really brought these issues very powerfully to the fore. We know that the closure of schools and nurseries has had an impact on everyone, but a disproportionate impact on women, who are so very often the main providers of childcare. So that's one of the reasons that the Scottish government...
And if the women they're talking about here are in relationships with men and they have children together and the man is out providing and the woman is at home looking after the children, I don't see what the issue is there, realistically, because, historically, women, childbearers, they form bonds with their children in their early years of development before they go back to work or whatever it may be. Stay-at-home mums, etc. I know financially speaking that's a bit more difficult in this day and age, but it's always talked about as if it's a fucking burden, But what would feminists know about having children anyway? Or in Sturgeon's case, having a fucking bobby.
Government is continuing to work with local councils to deliver on the expansion of early learning and childcare. The expansion, unfortunately, had to be delayed a bit because of COVID, but I'm pleased to say it is now back on track to be delivered from August this year. It's also the case, of course, that many sectors with higher levels of female employment, retail and hospitality, for example, are amongst those that have been hardest hit by the pandemic.
Interestingly, though, these tend to be, 9 times out of 10 tend to be areas that they don't push for men to go into. Well, if it's a high-paying sector they want, such as psychology, or one of the psychologies anyway,
And the restrictions that we've had to put in place. And as women generally earn less and are much more likely to be in part-time or...
Earn less if they're in the same job, but it's just I'm not sitting here doing a Sargon and just picking apart things that anybody can pick apart. It's remarkable to me how, after all these years, they still spew out the same nonsense that was debunked in 2015 when Sargon of Akkad was fucking cool to most.
Less secure employment. The impact of being furloughed or made unemployed is particularly acute. Now, support from government can mitigate some of that impact, whether that's through direct support to businesses or help for families, such as the continued provision of free school meals through the holiday periods. But we also need to take longer term action, which doesn't just mitigate the impact of inequality, but helps to address the root causes of persistent inequality. The PD Products Act, which was passed late last year, is a specific, but I think really important example of that. Scotland is the first country in the world to legislate for universal free access to PD.
Yes, Scotland's the first country in the world to do many things. One of the videos the video I should say, was trying to make last night, which ended up being too long, but maybe me didn't have the microphone turned on, so it was pointless anyway. I found out she was the first to make Scotland implement many things in Scotland, including According to the publications I was reading last night, Scotland was the first country to adopt the Paris Climate Accord recommendations, as well as being the first country to adopt the Sustainable Development Goals in 2015, as well as being the first country in the world to declare a climate emergency, as well as being the first country in the world to develop a climate justice fund, to name 4 there off the cuff, and a fifth of, I suppose, the first country in the world to implement free period products for girls in schools, or girls in general in Scotland. And this is their first example, I assume, of a few others. As I said, I haven't actually watched this video. This is real time. But you know, that's the go-to answer to justify or to prove, clear-cut proof that gender inequality is rife in Scotland. And this gender inequality, of course, is what leads to violence against women and girls. I mean, are you fucking serious? Period poverty, like, you know. I mean, period tampons and whatnot. You get like Tesco value tampons for like 27p and whatnot, you know. But apparently it's period poverty, you know. I mean, I'm pretty sure a tissue would do the same job, but nah. It all needs to be free. Nothing's free, of course, but this is the same woman who promised all the children laptops and whatnot, and barely any kids had one since she was re-elected. But that's here nor there.
Products. We're also taking a number of steps to support women in employment.
Of course you fucking are. Of course you are. And if it's not women, it's BAMEs. Nothing for white men in particular. Nothing to address white men solely for being white men. No, can't do that. No.
In November, we announced a new programme to help women return to work following a career break. We're providing funding to organisations like Timewise and Flexibility Works to better promote flexible working practices. And through the Workplace Equality Fund, we are continuing to support projects which will make it easier for underrepresented groups to enter the labour market and progress through it. And I'm able to confirm today another important measure. Following extensive consultation, a model for the Gender Beacon Collaborative, which was another of your first year recommendations, has now been agreed. The collaborative will be delivered in partnership with the organisation Close the Gap, and it will bring together organisations from the private, public and third sectors, as well as the Scottish Government. The members of the collaborative will work together and share best practice on tackling workplace inequality. And they'll also receive specific support, for example, in calculating their organisation's gender pay gap and in implementing
gender pay gap. So, comparing CEOs to cleaners. Comparing line managers to receptionists. And the only way that you're going to reduce the gender pay gap is to either hire more women, or promote more women, or prioritise more women, essentially. Give them pay rises or put them into better paying positions, etc. It's just cancer. And this is the clear-cut proof that inequality is rife, because it's not actually inequality, or equality for that matter. I fucking can't stand these people, especially her.
That can help to close it. The Gender Beacon Collaborative will launch later this year, and I hope it will serve as an example to employers across the country on how they can make their own workplaces more equal. All of these measures I've spoken about so far are aimed at tackling specific inequalities. But the Scottish Government is also thinking very carefully, not simply about what decisions and policies we implement, but about how we make those decisions. Based on your recommendation, we've already established a Scottish Government Directorate for Equality, Inclusion and Human Rights. Its first director was appointed last month. And our latest programme for government also commits to an equality and human rights mainstreaming strategy. And that's intended to further embed equality at the very heart of our policy-making process. And it will seek to ensure that more people are involved in the decisions that then affect them. Again, I think the pandemic has shown why that's so important for women and also for many other groups, including minority ethnic communities, older people and disabled people. One important benefit of involving people more in the decisions that affect them is that we, I hope, then become better at identifying intersectionalities.
Oh my God, for fuck's sake, it's why I'm really annoyed at the video that I was trying to make last night. Didn't have the mic on because, funnily enough, like a good portion of it, I was going through old publications, some of which came into effect in like 2012, 2011, well before Thin Lips was running around promoting feminism everywhere she was, etc., or climate change, BAME, oppression, you know, the list goes on. And it was the fact that, like, the state of the United Nations, all the regimes or the changes that they were planning to make, the run up to what became the Sustainable Development bullshit in 2015, the goals and whatnot. There was things in place before that, and the Scottish government at the time was implementing pretty much everything that was suggested, doing it faster than most countries in comparison, and was being praised to no end for their speed and their cooperation and whatnot. I mean, I just can't remember it off the top of my head now, so I'm paraphrasing to a hoon extent, but it was strange to me how even back then the Scottish government was doing that. Now with her in charge, she's doing that. But when she talks about getting all these people involved and, you know, all this crap, and then it always seems, even with the Citizens' Assembly, all of the recommendations and the conclusions that are then agreed upon are identical to what would have been proposed and implemented anyway had Thin Lips just phoned up the United Nations and asked for the script. You know, it's very strange. And the same thing is very applicable here, because it would be feminists, it will be activists. It's not your everyday person. It's people that are their way inclined. So that's why they're targeting the children with their UNCRC nonsense. The Children's Charter. You know, when that comes into effect soon, I'm pretty sure that would make Scotland the first country in the world. Another example, first country in the world to implement that, by the way. The laws of the United Nations would supersede Scotland's own laws. They're also planning to implement, if I'm not mistaken, 4 other United Nations charters, one of which being another form of eradicating racial inequality. There's one for disabled people, one for elderly people, etc., and I'm pretty sure there was one for gender, but I don't know if they are recommending or they're implementing them as of yet, but that's in the pipeline as well. So again, these laws will supersede our own. But when it comes to the UNCRC, for example, when you've got the children all have a right to be taken to be listened to, for their views to be taken seriously, and for them to have a say and whatnot when it comes to policies and decisions that could affect them. So when they're being taught about climate change when they're 4 or 5 years old, and they're being taught about climate justice, etc., then they get asked for what they would like to see occur. Then they make recommendations such as, well, we want more climate education. Oh, well, I got to take them fucking seriously. Got to listen to them. Got to take them on board, what they're saying on board. And hey, presto, we've got more climate education coming. You know, that's just one example. But it's the way that they bring people on board who are their way inclined to begin with. But it's dressed up and presented as if anybody can participate. Well, where's my invitation then for things such as this? Because I sure as fuck wouldn't have sound very positive to say, or very progressive when it comes to the perils of ethnic minorities. You know, for example, or any other oppressed shite that you always rattle on about.
And it then should be easier to see how different types of inequality interact and compound each other.
It's just fucking nonsense, man.
It's an area where we know we need to do much better in future policy making. And that, of course, makes the Council's latest recommendations on tackling intersectional inequality so very timely. And I want to thank all of you for producing, again, such a thoughtful and ambitious report.
And you're going to accept it.
We will respond formally to each proposal in due course. Mm-hmm. But as in previous years, I want today to give you just some of my immediate thoughts and reflections. I'm aware that your report contains recommendations for other bodies, such as the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Human Rights Commission. And I think that recognises a key and very fundamental point, that although the Scottish Government must take a lead, that's our responsibility, other bodies also have a responsibility for tackling these inequalities.
Oh, yeah.
But in relation to the recommendations that are directed at the Scottish Government, we obviously support your proposal that equality legislation should be fully devolved to the Scottish Parliament, and we will continue to call for that and build support for that. The Council has also proposed a change in relation to the budget process, and I can say that we will consider that recommendation very carefully as we develop our new mainstreaming strategy. You've also highlighted the need for the public sector to get better at collecting and using intersectional data, and I think that's really important.
Oh, fucking
We're taking steps already in that direction.
See if she says anything
last summer, for example.
Quote unquote importance before I move on to other things. But I mean, I'm just noticing the time here. I mean, for fuck's sake, 34 minutes and I'm still in this twat.
She's asking around language and talking about how we need to make sure that we're using inclusive language. And that we need to kind of make sure that that's something that we're really thoughtful about. And I did touch on that also earlier as well. So your thoughts around, I suppose in some ways, learning that perhaps you have also done around that need for being mindful and thoughtful about inclusive language.
I'll try not to talk too long on this because it's something I could talk about for a long time. And I start from a perspective of somebody who, since I was a wee girl, has been fascinated by the power of language. You know, one of my, passions in life is reading fiction and understanding just how language can both be one of the most powerful tools of human connection, but also if used in certain ways, can put barriers in the way of greater connection and understanding. So it's something I'm really interested in. And I'll say two things here. That I hope don't sound contradictory, but perhaps try to build on that sense of language as an enabler, but also sometimes, if we're not careful, as an inhibitor, and the need to try and strike the right balance. So firstly, in direct response to Gemma, I think the importance of inclusive language can't be overstated. It is vital that we recognise that when we are talking about people, the people that are hearing us talk, take from the language we use often or assume attitudes and prejudices. And so if we want people to feel included and be included, then we cannot, through our language, speak in a way that has the opposite effect. So inclusive language and learning from people with lived experience, whether that's of disability, of gender inequality, or prejudice and discrimination in any way, about how we use language to include, is so really important. I suppose my word of caution about that, and again I speak from some personal experience here, is that while we should be very careful about that and always try to learn about that, I think we've got to be careful we don't make people so terrified of using the wrong language or using words that they perhaps don't mean what other people take to mean from that we stifle.
This year's campaign focuses on the dual themes of femicide, or gender-related killing of women, and the links between domestic abuse and the world of work, in recognition of the many women who have lost their lives at the hands of male violence. And isn't it upsetting and deplorable?
See, right off the bat, this was the... you're only 3 minutes into this video, and that's what I was talking about. So he goes on to talk about gender, or what was it? She said femicide. So women killed by men, specifically and only because they were women and the perpetrator was a man. You know, that man killed that woman because that man did not like women. But then ties it into the world of work and inequality. The fuck are the two? How are they relevant to each other? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. But anyway.
That in 2021 we have to have a global campaign to highlight the issue of femicide in societies across the world, but it does provide us the opportunity to explore what more we can do to change it. There is a simple and unpalatable truth at the heart of the abuse and violence women and girls face, and that is it continues to be underpinned by women's inequality and the attitudes and structural barriers that perpetuate that inequality.
See, this is what I'm saying. Like, I struggle to get through these videos. This one's 2 hours long. There's another one that's about 2 hours long. And the audacity of the title, it's called a debate. This isn't a debate. I can assure you it's not a debate. And I will not be playing the entirety of this 2 hours. And I will probably not play the majority or even half of the arseholes who take to the stand to kind of reiterate what she says. But what's she fucking talking about? Structural barriers. I mean, come on, like... Oh, come on. There's not enough women in STEM. That's why domestic abuse is off the charts. Oh, fuck off, you fucking idiots. Honest to God. I mean, these women don't know they're living, honestly. Shit. And again, it goes back to a point that I made relatively near the beginning of the video. This narrative falls apart when you take into consideration the one thing that they deliberately are leaving out of this conversation, and that is women on male domestic violence. You know, because it does happen.
COVID-19 has both exacerbated and shone a spotlight on what was already there. And that is why, as a government, we have relentlessly focused on ensuring that women and children get the help that they need, and that we're clear that tackling domestic abuse and all forms of gender-based violence remains a key priority. And that without ending women's inequality, we'll never completely rid Scotland of violence against women and girls.
See, without ridding Scotland of inequality, if we don't do that, then violence against women and girls will still persist. Again, this is the narrative where they try to suggest and imply that the reason that violence against women and girls exists as a concept in Scotland is because of gender inequality. You know, systemic barriers and outdated stereotypes and misogyny. Well, again, explain to me then female on male domestic violence. Because it does happen. Your narrative falls apart. This narrative could only make sense if it was 100% of the time that women were the victim, males being the perpetrators. But the way that they talk about it, you would think that was the case, but it's fucking not. And something that they love to do all the time is they say that, X is happening at a statistical rate, but it actually happens a lot more because a lot of women won't come forward. Well, a lot of men don't come forward when they're the victims of domestic violence, so get it fucking up, you.
That's why prioritising prevention and working together with partners is essential if we're to achieve our aim of a strong and flourishing Scotland where women and girls live free from all forms of violence and abuse and the attitudes that help to perpetuate it. Our Equally Safe strategy, jointly co-owned with COSLA, continues to have a decisive focus on prevention, seeking to strengthen national and local collaborative working to ensure effective interventions for victims and those at risk, and contains a clear ambition to strengthen the justice response to victims and perpetrators.
Sorry, like what attitudes? I mean, some of the men, the wet wipes come on later on and they give you the reasoning or the examples of the attitudes, apparently, anyway. But again, the narrative doesn't really fucking work when I'm asked for somebody to explain to me then how, if it's attitudes towards women that contribute to this as an issue in Scotland, what about when it's the other way around? And they can't answer that. So do the women that do the things that they do to their male partners, whether that be physical, whether that be coercive, whether it be one of the other forms of abuse that exist in a domestic format, do they do it to their male counterpart because of outdated stereotypes about men? Do they do it to their male counterpart because of their attitude towards men as a whole? Or is it just because they're that way inclined? They have something wrong with them? Because 9 times out of 10, people that act that way, whether they're a man or a woman, are that way inclined. You know, your average person doesn't operate or act like that. You know? For every one household that might have domestic abuse going on in some form, the neighbours will not, presumably, or statistically speaking, because the vast majority of the neighbourhood will be fucking normal people. Not everybody is the same. Some people have things wrong with them, hence why they rape, hence why they commit crimes in general. Standing preaching in Parliament about how women are oppressed and promoting all this feminist-inspired fucking policy and dogma and trying to imply or suggest that we're going to re-educate little boys, you're not going to change the minds of somebody who's already damaged. But the narrative, of course, you're completely ignoring that fact of the matter. You're ignoring that. These people are ignoring that in order to justify continuing on with their feminist shit. The removal of gender stereotypes, etc., as just little examples. And one thing that I don't know if I've mentioned, because this video is now 43 minutes long, is how infuriated I get with feminist shit for one serious reason, and that is the alarming birth rate decline in Scotland. But yet they still press on ahead with this shit anyway. You know? Feminism, I know that like all across the fucking world, like birth rates are declining, but come on. Like, it's almost as if they're putting things in motion to accelerate the decline here in Scotland. Feminism has played a role as time has gone on, and it's more feminism that they want.
A refresh of our Equally Safe delivery plan to build on the many achievements of the previous iteration will shortly commence. And once again, we'll work with our partners to develop the updated delivery plan to meet the needs of where we are now and continue to ensure that we take a holistic approach to tackling all forms of violence against women and girls. Since we published the delivery plan in November 2017, we have made real progress in delivering on the 118 actions that it included. Of course, to fully deliver Equally Safe's ambitions, we need to prevent violence, abuse and discrimination from happening at all. And that's why our strategy connects to our wider ambitions for women's equality, and in this context, why we place so much emphasis on the importance of our primary prevention agenda. Our Equally Safe at School project, developed with Zero Tolerance and Rape Crisis Scotland, applies a whole school approach to tackling gender inequality and gender-based violence in schools, equipping and empowering young people with the knowledge they need to navigate consent and healthy relationships. We're also focusing on workplaces and their role in driving change.
I don't know how us lads got on at school without the wonders of feminism. I really don't, because, you know, my generation, I was in school, well, when I left school, 2014 or 2015 I left school, I think. And we never had any of this bollocks in school, really, that I can recall. None of it. We weren't taught about, you know, systemic oppression, and you know, gender-based violence and all this shit. We weren't taught really about consent. It was common knowledge. We didn't really need to be taught things that we knew anyway. But again, you could have taught us all about consent, but if there was a boy in that class who was going to grow up to be a potential rapist because he had something wrong with him, you could have taught him about consent till the cows came home. He was still going to be that way inclined. Again, these people fail to fucking address the issue. Some people, it's a sad reality, are just wired up wrong. But of course, no, it's like these stereotypes, you know. Oh, no. I mean, these women, as I said, they don't know they're living it. They do not know they're living. They do not know that they're living. They are standing there, highly paid women, feminists. They just look like normal women, but yet they are talking fucking waffle. Total waffle. Attributing things to their plight that have no relevancy. Women get murdered, men get murdered. Women murder women, men murder men, and vice versa, etc. Things happen, shit happens, tragedies happen. But when specific tragedies occur, these people will grab hold of them tight and they will apply it to their plight. And it's fucking annoying, for lack of a better term.
Has been highlighted through this year's other 16 Days of Action theme on domestic abuse and its links with the world of work. Domestic abuse has a devastating
world of work and domestic abuse. Okay.
Impact on victims, and we've collaborated with Women's Aid as part of our Equally Safe in Practice project on the launch of a new framework which will ensure that workforces across Scotland have a better understanding of domestic abuse, sexual violence and the norms and cultures that perpetuate it.
The norms and cultures, you know. Again, I mean, you could probably take this sort of rhetoric to an Islamic nation and start this charade, this campaign, this activist activism that you've got going, but this is Scotland. I know that there is a bit of a lad culture to a certain extent, which I'm not justifying or making excuses for, but the vast majority of men are normal and we don't have specific attitudes that permeate, and we don't go out looking to harangue, harass, sexually abuse and whatnot women, but there will be some that do, the odd ones, wankers who get disavowed by normal men. And then there will be the people who take it a step further, who are wired up wrong.
This builds on our work with Close the Gap to develop Equally Safe at Work, an employer accreditation programme working with local authorities to incorporate gender equality into their internal policies. Scotland's police and justice partners continue to prioritise domestic abuse cases, and we're working very hard to ensure that victims receive the most appropriate response and support within the justice system. Our Gold Standard Domestic Abuse Scotland Act 2018 has strengthened the law and continues to be positively received by the public, partners and Police Scotland, who have greater opportunities to tackle the issue. This year we brought forward legislation on domestic abuse protection orders through the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Act. Gender-based violence, however, is not limited to domestic abuse, rape or sexual violence, and I'm saddened that other forms have emerged over the last 30 years. And we recognise the increasing level of online abuse and the disproportionate impact that this has on women.
Online abuse is now gender-based violence. It's violence against women and girls to have mean things said to you online. But again, even that, take that as a concept in and of itself. A lot of these wet white female politicians get abuse on Twitter and whatnot, and they immediately assume it's misogyny. No, it's just people don't like you. Ever thought it's because you're part of a cancerous party? Maybe that's why you get abuse online. I know. But again, men get abuse online too, politicians, but can't talk about that. No, can't do that, no.
Girls, and I and many of my colleagues here in this place.
This is disproportionate. I remember that article that came out, was it a few years ago? And out of the list of like 20 MPs in Westminster, you know, the likes of Abbott, Diane Abbott, etc., included within, it was Tory white men that got the most abuse. So that blows up the idiot out of the water.
Will have first-hand experience of this, unfortunately.
Oh, yeah.
There's no place for this in a modern society. And we'll work with partners to ensure victims have as an effective and swift access to justice as possible. As I previously mentioned, our delivery plan is due to run until the end of this year, and this marks an opportune moment for us all to reflect on progress so far, but also to think about what equally safe might look like in the future, both in terms of strategic ambition and plans for delivery. The independent review of funding and commissioning of frontline services will also give an opportunity to create the conditions for a potential transformation of the current funding landscape. We'll take forward further engagement on both these pieces of work over the next few months. To conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, whilst we have achieved a lot, particularly in this Parliament, on a cross-party basis, there's a lot that remains to be done. A world without violence is possible, and that's what I want for my daughter, who is now an adult herself. I urge all of us to work together, from constituency to committee and across this chamber, to do all we can to eradicate violence against women and girls from Scotland and to play our part in eradicating it from around the world. Thank you.
It's also imperative that the Government properly records data on gendered violence. The Scottish Government does not document femicide as a standalone crime, nor does Police Scotland categorise any crimes as femicide. Instead, it is included within wider homicide statistics, despite its intrinsically gendered characteristics and motivations. The work of the femicide...
Do you know that for a fact, that every single instance where a man murders a woman, he did so because that person was a woman? Do you know that for a fact? Or is it just an assumption?
And recording data is invaluable, but the Government needs to also record its own data. Failing to do so can mask the severity of the crime and make it harder to properly prosecute and eliminate. It's also important to recognise that a legal response is not the only way to tackle gender inequality and violence. We have come a long way, and I recognise the measures already taken by...
You'll see what's about to happen here, you know. So gender inequality and violence, tackling the two, because they're synonymous, you know. So we've just had a big speech about women being the victims of domestic violence and murder, etc. And now it's just, let's just shoehorn in some feminist bullshit. Of course, why not? Because that's what it's really about, isn't it?
This Parliament, but there is so much more we must do. We must commit to eradicating poverty, rooting out gender stereotyping in education, increasing women's participation and representation in public life.
Participation and representation in public life. Of course, you see, that will eradicate gender inequality, which by extension, in case you hadn't been catching on, will reduce gender-based violence. Of course.
Ensure the provision of affordable childcare and develop social security policies that promote women's safety and financial independence. More action needs to be taken to ensure women's equality in the workplace too. The Government and local authorities can and must do more to narrow the gender pay gap and end the triple burden of labour. Employers also have a responsibility to tackle gender inequality, and I commend the work of the Better Than Zero campaign in organising against precarious work, and in particular for women travelling alone at night. I also want to highlight the incredible work of trade unions in Scotland in organising women workers and fighting for better pay and conditions and against workplace discrimination. For example, the GMB trade union is doing, among other things, incredible work organising care workers in its Fight for 15 campaign. Local authorities must do more to tackle gender inequality and violence too, and they must ensure women's equality is embedded in their work and services, do everything they can in their power to make local streets and communities safe for women. Clyde...
Yeah. So we'll promote gender equality and that will make the streets safer. See, they keep tying in the two when they're not synonymous. They're two irrelevant issues, or points even. But they keep tying them together. Can't solve one without the other. And it's convenient that you can't solve the serious issue without tackling their bullshit, such as their oppression Olympics. You know, I can sick it, like, it's so obvious what they're doing.
Express my disappointment that there's not more men sitting here today.
Here's the first wet wipe. Honest as fuck, if this video wasn't 54 minutes long, I would spend a good portion of the next 2 to 3 minutes running this wet wipe into the ground. But you know, I really should refrain. But he's just an absolute ball bag. They all are, but the men especially in this instance, because it's just, well, you're just listening to him.
Presiding Officer, it gives me no pleasure to be speaking in today's debate, because in this day and age, we shouldn't need to have the debate at all. Women have been given lots of advice over the years. They've been told not to walk home alone or dress too provocatively or show too much skin. They've been told to mind their drinks while out socialising or not to get too drunk. They've even been given secret codes to tell the bar staff what to do when they feel in danger. They've been given all this advice in order to protect them from the threat of male violence, and now it appears the new threat is a...
Like, some of the things he says there that I, to an extent, agree with, but first of all, that's a bit of a straw man to begin with. You know, you don't hear that being trotted out as regularly as these people would like you to believe, that women are told not to walk home at night alone or not to dress provocatively and whatnot. But, you know, it's just shit. Women are not told to behave a certain way in order to prevent male violence, as he touts himself to be. You know, I've heard it in the past, been mentioned before, here and there, but it's not a common talking point in the form of advice, as far as I'm aware anyway. Maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. But I just feel that's a bit of a straw man. In relation to the provocative clothing, there's a reason they're wearing provocative clothing if it's in the nightclub scene. I mean, women ain't angels, and the modern woman is not an angel, I'm sorry. No. They dress to impress, they dress for attention, and they get attention, but obviously there is some men, whether it's alcohol-induced, which again, don't excuse, or it's men that are wired up wrong and whatnot, they may act upon it or go too far. But there will be a plethora of men prior to this engagement with this man that's in the wrong, in this hypothetical, who were giving you the eye and whatnot. And if you were dressed that way, I'm sorry, maybe I'm being a bit sexist here. I would assume you wanted that attention to a certain extent. And if it was a man you found attractive, then hey, fucking presto, you're in. Success. But, yeah, and that's for like the spiking of drinks and whatnot. Again, these are certain individual men who act in a specific way that is kind of, well, I would say, disavowed by the majority of men. Not that I go out very often into the nightclub scene. You know, it's not really for me, if I'm honest. But, you know, I would have thought that the vast majority of men, considering, as I said earlier on, we happen to be normal, we would consider behaviour such as that as disgusting, crass, grotesque. It would be called out, we would disavow, we wouldn't want to associate with any individual who involved themselves with something such as this. But this fucking wet wipe is trying to imply, or he goes on to sort of insinuate anyway, from what I recall, because it was weeks ago that I watched this video, that this is a male issue. No, it's fucking not. It's specific males that do things like that. I'm not responsible for what that man in question did, because yes, there was a talk of a series of women having their drinks spiked in Scotland at some point. I don't know if it was this year or whatnot, but it does get discussed for the duration of these things. But I'm not responsible for that. You know what I mean? My neighbour ain't responsible for that. The person that did it's responsible for that. Fucking sick. You know, this is the obviously it kind of ties into the need for us to have little boys re-educated. You know, it's like dead stereotype. You know.
But this isn't a young man's generational thing. It's a multi-generational, classless, continuous thing that needs to be faced up to. Recognising International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls also tells us that this is a global issue. But the danger is, by focusing on that global perspective, we risk failing to ask the most fundamental question of all, and that is, what do we do, right here and right now? And when I say we, I mean men and boys. What it is, why is it that we think the solution to the issue of male violence is to tell women and girls how to protect themselves from us?
Well, we don't know, do we? Again, this is a straw man. I certainly don't, anyway. I don't need to tell women how to protect themselves from me, because I don't intend to do anything that could be, that could justify them needing to protect themselves. Again, there's some men that are just wired up fucking wrong.
Surely the most obvious answer is to stop the behaviour that hurts them in the first place.
Again, no. Not the vast majority of men, or boys, who grow up to be men, don't act that way, behave that way.
If we manage to get any message out of today's debate, we need to get the message across to...
Put it this way, do you think he acts like that? This is something that was pissing me off every time one of the men took to the stand, to grandstand about the virtues of being a good goyim, a good progressive man. A male feminist, essentially. Do you think he acts like that? You know, do you think women need to protect themselves in his company? Or had to when he was younger, in his party animal days? The answer is probably no if I was to ask him that directly to his face. So what makes him different from the rest of the men around him? What makes him different from the male species, the male sex in Scotland? Why do they all need to change but he doesn't? Or is it more plausible to assume that he's probably, I don't know, maybe, I don't know, for the benefit of the doubt, he's normal? The vast majority of other men are just like him, who could quite easily take to a podium and spew out the same shit that he's saying, and probably mean it. But you're not going to get a guy that's wired up wrong going up onto the podium and saying it for the right reasons. And you're not going to get a guy that's wired up wrong listening to this shit, who's going to come out the other side of it and go, you know what, I need to change my ways. No, because he's wired up wrong. No amount of feminist-inspired education is going to fucking change that.
The men that we are responsible for our actions. During the marches after the rape and murder of Sarah Everard,
I'm not responsible for the murder of Sarah Everard. Nor am I responsible for the actions of any other man bar myself. Fuck off.
Which said, why don't you just stop killing us? Think about that for a second. Why don't you just stop killing us? Well, the men...
Well, we don't know, do we? Some men do. You know, but the men also kill other men. Women kill men sometimes too. You know, things happen. As I said, shit happens. But again, this is the assumption that men go out of their way to kill women specifically and only because they are a woman. And again, I think that comes more down to a sexuality-based thing, because if there's a sexual motive and whatnot, if it's a gay guy, he's going to go after a guy, I would have thought, you know. Anyhow.
The message is clearly not being heard, because since that crime, there have been over 80 women killed by men since March alone.
And how many men have been killed by men in that time frame, I wonder?
And I'm not asking how many more there has to be before we start to do something about it. I say we start to do something about it right now, and we start to do it for real. This isn't an issue for somewhere else. It is an issue in every town, in every city, right here in Scotland. And we must look at ourselves, at how we behave, and how we teach the next generation.
Fucking speak for yourself, you dick. That's what I'm talking about. What the fuck these people think they are, eh? Like, they're so held, but even in something as controversial as this, if you want to call it that, in terms of, you know, the murder of women and whatnot, it doesn't matter if it's that or anything. It always seems to boil down to needing to get into the minds of all of us. We need to change how we operate and whatnot. Yeah. Sorry, I mean, I really, I'm conscious of the time now. It's over an hour long. So my points have kind of gone a bit haywire as I'm a bit distracted now. But it's just, how the fuck are any of us responsible for the actions of one individual? It's just nonsensical. It's absolutely nonsensical. And you know the worst part about it is, again, this is the narrative. If we're led to believe that the men in question perpetrate these murders have done so because of the society I should say, and the outdated stereotypes that, you know, are permeated around and, you know, are rife, like the microaggressions that Graham Campbell sees every day, etc. You know, if it's society that's at fault and outdated stereotypes and whatnot, why aren't we all the same way as the murderers then? Why aren't we all exactly the same way? Because we're all experiencing the same education, we're all experiencing the same societal stereotypes and whatnot from a young age, we're all experiencing the same things growing up as boys to men, yet the vast majority of us are A-okay, fine, wired right, yet some ain't. It seems more plausible to assume the point that I've been stressing throughout the duration of the shit that I've just had to endure, and for the purpose of this video, and that is that some people are just not wired up right. It's got fuck all to do with the rest of us.
As a boy, I was taught to treat girls in the same ways I'd want my sisters to be treated.
Oh, you were you? Oh, funny that. You know? Because that's how most of us, or I would have thought all of us, the vast, not all, I would have thought, okay, so there'll be some that ain't really taught that. But the vast majority of us, we're all taught the same thing. Yeah? And we're all fine. But as I said, there'll be some who are taught that who still act out of character, out of the ordinary and whatnot. Can't change that.
However, that life lesson didn't fully arm me with the knowledge and understanding that I think we should teach all our young men and boys about.
So what are you trying to say? So are you akin to the murder of Sarah Everard, are you? Or were you taught enough for you to grow up to treat women with respect, etc., etc., when it's deserved, obviously? Not all women are immediately by default deserve respect. Some women are bitches, but point remains the same. Like, he just claimed there that he was taught enough. He was taught the bare minimum, and he's grown up fine. But yeah, it's not enough for the men of today, or the boys of today who will be the men of tomorrow. It's not enough. We need to do more. Why? So they can grow up to be identical to you, in theory. But you were taught the bare minimum. I see.
About what it is to be a female in our society. And it doesn't matter if she's someone's mother, daughter or sister, that she is someone at all is what matters. My daughters and wife explained to me the turmoil and fear a girl feels when walking home and some random guy calls out her wolf whistles. Even worse when there's more than one male, and safety in numbers they egg each other on to check her out. But they never seem to understand why the compliment isn't welcomed, why fear kicks in for a lone female as she walks home at night and there's a man walking behind her, or worse, crosses a street and starts walking towards her. This, of course, when people start to chip in with the argument, not all men. But how does someone who has grown up learning to fear males know that you are safe?
It's not my fucking problem. It's nobody else's problem either. I'm sorry if women feel that way. But, I mean, how do you actually... I mean, they just say things, I think, and they don't really think bigger picture long term. How the fuck are we meant to change the mindset of women in that respect? You know, we can all castrate ourselves, agree to castrate ourselves and skip and, you know, wave rainbow flags every time women are out at night and whatnot. But again, the men that are wired up wrong ain't going to do that. What's the fucking point? The men that they theoretically fear, the hypothetical men, are the ones that are wired up wrong. The rest of us wouldn't dare do the things that this man is implying women are all fucking petrified of.
They don't. She doesn't. And it's us, it's our men's responsibility to make sure that we create the space to allow that fear to be dispelled.
What are we meant to do exactly? So, like this, we're walking down the road behind a woman. Are we supposed to shout to the woman to reassure that we're not going to rape her? Sure, that'll fucking fill her confidence. Or what about the woman who's on the other side of the street and we need to cross to go on the same side of the street as her? Well, I suppose we could just stay on the side of the road that we're on, but why do we need to go that way? Fuck, like.
That means being fully mindful of how our actions, however innocent, could be interpreted. We teach our children from a very early age that unwanted male attention is acceptable.
Speak for fucking self, like, you know what I mean? Anyway, this is getting too long. I'll see who else I can get up before I go. Now, we teach children from an early age that unwanted male attention is acceptable. What the fuck's he talking about? Like, and again, though, what we're gonna do there is we need to go into the nurseries now. You know, this guy's made a fucking a bombshell point. You know, nobody's thought of that one before. So let's re-educate nursery children.
With the advent of terms like rape culture or sexual violence against women is excused in the media and popular culture, can we really claim that we have made a real and significant enough level of progress in addressing the root causes of male power and abuse, control women?
Male power? Oh, fuck off. Like, this is patriarchy talk now.
In fact, we will agree it's a very depressing picture.
So again, no, when it's women on male violence, is it female power? Again, these buzzwords and these narratives, these arguments do not hold weight when female on male violence, etc. occurs. It would only be somewhat potentially plausible and believable and stand potentially the test of time if it was 100% of the case, women being the victim. But it's not. So shut the fuck up with these daft patriarchal talking points, eh? Oh, fuck off, man. Shit. Oh, wait.
Which cuts across justice, social attitudes, equality and human rights. But we must tackle the root causes of male attitudes and male violence against women. It comes in many forms: sexual harassment, domestic abuse, revenge pornography, female genital mutilation, human trafficking, child brides, stealthing, rape, femicide, and so the list goes on. And there's not been a time where I think that parents have become more concerned for their daughter's safety And as other speakers have talked about the recent horrific crimes of spiking, including bodily spiking of women rendering unconscious for reasons which we know only too well. I also want to support the call of Megan Gallagher in what our clubs and our hospitality sector should be doing to keep women safe. But the advent of smartphones and the social media has meant that teenage girls are often under pressure from boys to send nude photographs of themselves. And this was highlighted in a recent report by Ofsted in England, and it said it's become the norm in schools. Out of 32 schools inspected, 9 out of 10 girls said that unsolicited explicit pictures or videos were sent to them or their peers very often. The report states it's alarming that many children and young people, and particularly girls, feel that they have to accept sexual harassment as part of growing up. So I would ask the Cabinet Secretary to reflect on whether or not we need to look at Scottish schools to see if we have an alarmingly similar trend. Boys and young men do need to be brought into the debate, and as Jim Fairley excellently said in his speech, men must take responsibility for their behaviour. Zara McDermott's recent documentary on rape culture, where she talks to young men, she finds out that some of those men she talked to, their first experience of watching pornography can be as young as 9 or 10, and many boys...
Here's the porn argument. I mean, for fuck's sake, most boys watch porn when they were teenagers, you know? Myself included in that front. You know, I'd be lying if I said I didn't. But they always tried to make out that watching porn and it's all rape and, you know, and violent scenes and whatnot. No, that's quite a lot of it just fucking looks like normal sex to me. You know, not that I watch porn anymore. It's been a while since I've done that. It's been a few years, in fact, 2, I think. No fap. Very productive, very healthy, by the way. Just on a side note. But, yeah, the shit that I used to watch when I was 13, 14, 15, it was just normal. It just looked like kind of how it was when I did it myself. Yeah. But, yeah, the argument always is like, oh, there's all these horrible things in porn and whatnot. No. Like, yeah, there is some extreme variations of porn on the internet. No one's denying that. But I don't think boys go out of their way to find that, initially anyway. And again, girls watch porn too. I never used to believe that when I was a teenager, but apparently they do anyway. So, again, what about them? Should they be watching porn? Or does that matter? Of course it doesn't matter, does it?
First understanding of what sex is like is through the internet and pornography, showing an unrealistic and often violent representation.
Often violent? Is it as if they just type in porn and everybody is a violent sex scene? It's just not the case. You know, I'm not an advocate for porn, but it's just bullshit. It's fucking bullshit. These stereotypes, these nonsense assumptions that you people have, and you'll trot them out as if they're fucking factual. You know, I think before you open your mouth, you should probably do a bit of research from time to time. I know, type in porn yourself. See what I'm talking about. You're not gonna get a bunch of rape videos. You know.
Of sex. So I'm sure that we do agree that we need more programmes in schools that teach young people about consent and aim to prevent violence in dating and relationships. And I do want to commend the work of Rape Crisis Scotland, where they worked with over 10,000 young people in the last 6 months to follow a programme which allowed pupils to explore and better understand these issues. Cybercrime has also doubled in the last year, and it now accounts for an estimated 1 in 3 sexual crimes. And these crimes include revenge pornography, online harassment and abuse, which is sharply risen in recent...
And again, women, or girls I should say, are just as what's the word I'm looking for? Sorry, fucking it's getting late in the day. Women or girls I should say, are just as capable of revenge porn, just as capable of harassment. And again, I'd like to see how they define harassment in this instance. Probably calling a woman a bitch on Twitter or something. But give the benefit of the doubt, let's just say it's legitimate harassment. Girls are capable of doing that as well as men or boys. You know, it's not just a male thing. You know? But, of course, that's not what we're talking about here now, because it's the women's.
Years.
And again, how is, you know, revenge porn violence against girls? It's nasty, it's horrible. No one's denying that. But, can it really be construed as violence? For fuck's sake, man.
And research by the NSPCC shows that the reported cases of predators abusing children after contacting them online has risen 78% in just 4 years. The United Nations declared shadow pandemic as women across the world face being stuck with their abuser and unable to get help or respite. Since the pandemic began, 2/3 of cases waiting to be heard in our High Court are sexual crimes. I'm shocked myself to learn of these figures in the last few months. There are around 32,000 trials outstanding in sheriff courts, including many domestic abuse cases. The Lord Advocate herself has described the court backlog as an enormous problem, and she noted in a recent committee session the extraordinary number of sexual violence cases that are waiting for trial, and that the impact that has on the most vulnerable members of our community and our society require the protection of our court. And of course, she's talking about women and girls. So we need to look at the specific ways that these backlogs are placing a disproportionate burden on women and children.
See, but this is what I was on about. Like, they keep tying in things that aren't relevant to each other. Like, these are talking points that you can have at any point, at any time during your stay in Parliament. Nobody's denying your right to do so. They are valid points that need to be addressed. Nobody's denying that. Problems that need to be solved. Nobody's denying that. But again, I don't really see what relevancy that has to some of the things that have been mentioned for the duration of this debate, such as that four-eyed wet wipe talking about how apparently we teach little boys that that unwanted male attention is fine, etc., or underrepresentation in the workforce, things like that. There's so many things that are being brought up here because it's the feminists just grabbing every single fucking thing that they see wrong with society, and they're trying to throw as many points out as possible in order for them all to come to a consensus at the end and agree to move forward. Some of the things are relevant to this discussion, others are not.
Presiding officer, by the end of this session of Parliament, the sixth session, we must work together to ensure that we are on a permanent path to change, not just through changes to the justice system, but to strike at the heart of men's violence against women, and be brave enough to tackle this at all ages, at all stages, in our schools, in our education system. We must begin to see a reversal of these trends and these horrific crimes, or we as politicians will not have done our job.
See, again, so what you're going to do? So violence against women and girls. Okay, so you're going to go to the education system and do what exactly? Again, you're going to preach to the choir about treating girls with respect, etc., to a bunch of little boys, or adolescent boys, who know that anyway. And then there'll be that one boy in the corner who's wired up wrong, who's going to take no heed of what you're telling him. Because again, some men, some boys act a specific way because they are not wired up right. It's not a societal issue. It's not outdated stereotypes, and it's not fucking misogyny. Or statewide misogyny anyway. It's individuals who are wired up wrong. And responsibility is not being placed at their feet, because instead responsibility is being placed at the feet of every boy under the guise of a problem with misogyny that we all have to tackle. Fuck off, like.
Thank you. I call Neil Gray to be followed by Maggie Chapman.
Oh no, not this fucking ball bag.
Thank you.
I don't really want to play too much of his speech because it's similar to the other dickhead, but he's just another wet wipe. But I heard Maggie Chapman getting referenced there, and she, every time she takes to the stage, she's got to be one of the most demented human beings in that fucking parliament. And I say human being because I actually don't know how that human being identifies. I really don't. And I don't want to misgender now, I'm already a misogynist and whatnot. But I genuinely don't know, but I swear to God that women, I think it's women, well, it's born a woman, we'll just say that much for the argument's sake, but just a fucking Fruit Loop, an absolute Fruit Loop. So I'll try and include a little bit of this twat speech, but we'll see. And I want to get this guy's speech, Big Benny Boy, he's a fucking, honest to God, like, this is by far my longest video, but hey-ho,
I speak as a local MSP concerned about local, proven domestic abuse services. Others have already talked about what drives abuse and violence against women and girls, who it is that is killing them, and whose behaviour needs to change in order for us.
But it's not always men that are killing women, though, is it? Because some women kill other women, and we don't actually know the root causes if we're going to go by what's been discussed here today in this so-called debate, because the excuses and the justification or the reasoning that's been put forward is just fucking shit. I'm sorry, it's shit. Societal attitudes and outdated stereotypes and misogyny is rife, and that's why these things happen. Fucking do one, man. Just do one.
To see this violence and killing stop, it's men. And those of us men who...
It's the men that are wired up wrong. Same way some women are wired up wrong.
Say it's not all of us.
It's fucking not.
Not all men are the same. as I've seen in varying degrees in response to...
It would be the equivalent of saying not all white, like some white guys. I know this is a bit different because obviously there's black guys and, you know, all different type of men, Asian men and whatnot. But let's just say, or I suppose we could do it actually with the blacks because they seem to be very susceptible to crime, you know. So this would be the equivalent of saying, this isn't just a black male problem, this is black men. This is all black men. And you'll get all the anti-racists and whatnot coming out and saying, no, it's the blacks that participate in the crime. It's not all black men. I mean, look at Barack Obama, look at Zuby, etc. And I know I'm being like very childish at this point with my my examples, but I am starting to wade in terms of time in the morning. But the point I'm trying to get at is here, they'd be quick to tell you that it's not all black people or black guys. It's just some black guys. It's the black guys that participate in said crime. It'd be the ones involved in the gang culture, etc. But, you know, your average blue-collar working black man, he's not like that, you know? It's the same for men, in general, when it comes to shit. We're not all like that. The vast majority are not like that. Some are. Why? Because they're fucking wired up wrong. And I will keep saying that point. Because the point feminists will ignore. Deliberately. Deliberately, of course. Because if they address it, and they go down that train of thought, all of a sudden, all the shit they've been saying in terms of misogyny and patriarchal oppression and whatnot goes out the window.
Social media posts today completely miss the point, as Jim Fairley said in what was an excellent speech. It is true that not all men kill or abuse.
Most men don't, by the way, dickhead. You know, it is true that not all men kill. No, it is true that most men don't. Most men do not kill or abuse. Do you? I'll ask him the same question I asked the other one. I'd say this way, are you that way inclined? Do you have these thoughts? Do women need to protect themselves around you? Probably no. So why is it acceptable for you? You're fine, but the rest of us ain't. We need to do more. We need to be educated. Fuck yourself.
Women, but it's also true that when women are killed or abused, they're almost always...
Almost always. But not always. Funny that. So, almost always. So, does that mean that sometimes it's women? Does that not blow all the reasoning out the window as to why these things occur? I'm too big brain for this shit, clearly, eh?
Killed or abused by men. Indeed, it should shock and anger and shame all of us and give us renewed focus to tackle violence against women when we know, as Eleanor Whittam said in her incredibly moving speech, the Counting Dead Women Twitter account is today, on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, publishing the names of all the women killed by men in the UK so far in...
Okay, and nobody is saying that that is a nice thing, that women are killed in general, irrespective of what sex or race the perpetrator is, but... the assumption, of course, is femicide here. You know, they were killed because they're women and whatnot. Maybe that's true in some instances. Maybe it's true in all. What about the men that are killed by men? I'm not trying to do a comparison here. Murder's grotesque anyway. But the point is here that these instances that they're bringing up bear no fucking relevancy to the average man who is not that way inclined. For fuck's sake. Fucking unreal, man.
2021. They started tweeting a woman's name every 5 minutes from 8 a.m. and it will take them until 7 p.m. to publish the names of all 126 women who have been killed by men in the UK this year. How much longer would it take to recognise the 87,000 women killed around the world, as highlighted by the Cabinet Secretary? We need action to stop this. That's why I welcome...
What are you going to do? I wonder, eh?
Welcome at Police Scotland's new campaign, Don't Be That Guy, because the...
Oh, yes. So, you know, this is one of the latest shit shows in Scotland. So, the Don't Be That Guy campaign is a bunch of guys and they give off all these different, they have all these talking points in the video. And, you know, the premise is obviously, don't be that guy. Well, most of us ain't that fucking guy. You know? So, for people who wouldn't do these things anyway, don't be that guy in the campaign that comes along with it. It's pointless and irrelevant. For the people who may be that way inclined, I don't think the vast majority of them are going to watch a video like that, listen to the pish that is said within said video in the campaign, and come out the other side of it and go, you know what, I was wrong. I'm not going to behave in that way anymore. I'm going to change my ways. No, I doubt it. I doubt it very much. Because they know what they're doing, regardless, is wrong anyway. So why the fuck would a wee campaign video changing on? Yeah. And he goes on to say the abuse of women, the killing of women, does not come from nowhere. I wonder where it comes from. Oh, fucking hell. Oh, shit.
Women doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from unacceptable behaviour being tolerated, left unchallenged and allowed to progress. So don't be that guy, includes all of us, challenging the behaviour of others. That can sometimes be difficult, but not nearly as difficult as for the women suffering this abuse. So we must commit to stop the casual sexualisation and misogynistic abuse masked in a parody.
Abuse. So, our nationwide fucking hell. Contempt for women as a whole, sorry, was the phrase I was looking for. I don't know why I said nationwide. That's how misogyny is defined as far as I'm aware, but the word just gets thrown about far too often these days. You know, the joys of living in a feminist hellhole. But, yeah. Again, no, I agree to a certain extent. Like, the behaviours of certain men, if they've been acting that way from a young age, and they've never been taught that that's wrong and whatnot, then yeah, they're probably more likely than most to go out and commit atrocities of some variation in their future life. But again, not my fucking fault, problem, or responsibility. That's theirs. That's their parents, that's their brothers, that's their sisters, that's their friends, if they've got any. Not fucking mine. Or his. Or any other man's.
Before I begin, can I refer to my register of interests? Pre-election, I worked for a rape crisis centre, and I thank once again all those involved in supporting and advocating for survivors of gender-based violence. It is heart-wrenching work, but so important. I also want to acknowledge and remember all the women and girls who have lost their lives because of gender-based violence, those named in the motion and around the chamber today, and those known to us, those who are unknown, unnamed, here in Scotland and around the world. And can I echo the Cabinet Secretary's comments about Emma Rich? Emma made Scotland a better country for women and girls, and be in the situation in the 21st century where our society, our culture is still so deeply unequal. That we are here at all should be a source of shame for all of us. 1 in 3 women have been abused in their lifetime. When things are tougher than usual, such as during a pandemic, the numbers of victims and survivors increase. A recent report from UN Women, based on data from 13 countries since the pandemic, shows that 2 in 3 women reported that they, or a woman they know, experienced some form of violence and are more likely to face food insecurity. Even more, if not all, women have experienced some form of gender-based oppression, coercion, financial insecurity, street harassment. So we can expect incidents of abuse and violence to rise as we face significant other crises, climate disasters, humanitarian crises and conflict. That same UN Women report shows that only 1 in 10 women said that victims would go to the police for help. We'll be speaking more about justice and policing issues in next week's debate, I'm sure. But I raised the Rape Crisis Scotland Survivor Reference Group's report on police responses to survivors this morning in FMQs because police dealings with survivors of sexual crimes tells us, among other things, just how entrenched sexism and misogyny are in our institutions and our society. It tells us just how important understanding and awareness of trauma is for both justice and for recovery. And it tells us how equality matters and just how vital intersectionality is. We still live in a deeply unequal, deeply patriarchal society where the abuse of power causes life-changing, sometimes life-ending, physical and mental harm. We should not accept this as inevitable. Violence against women can and must be prevented. It can and must stop. Stopping this violence will mean transformational action across many sectors: justice, health, education, policing, culture. It means securing long-term, not piecemeal funding for survivor-centred support services and the women's rights agenda. Fundamentally, it means tackling the root cause of violence and oppression: inequality. Inequality that fuels harmful social norms. Inequality that leads to the implementation of policies that have disproportionate impacts on women. COVID has made that only too abundantly clear. Indeed, the UN estimates that COVID could set women's equality back by a quarter of a century. We cannot assume that Scotland is immune to this. We women are not yet adequately protected from misogynistic behaviours and sexualised harassment. Gender-based violence happens to a majority, if not all, of us women. It costs us money. It wastes our time. It wastes our energy. It makes us fearful. It changes how we use public spaces. It makes us consider what we say and do, what we do not say and do not do. It exhausts us. It kills us. So we have a moral obligation to act. As parliamentarians, we must ensure that the policies and practices that we agree do not exacerbate gender-based violence or negatively impact women. We must take seriously the mechanisms we have in place to scrutinise what we do. Equalities impact assessments, for example, must never be just tick-box exercises. We also need to see the connections between different areas of policy and understand that well-meaning policy in one area can have devastating consequences in other areas, both in Scotland and further afield. Policy coherence matters. But it is not only in our policy making and scrutiny that we require to act. We need wholesale culture change. Preventative measures play a key part in this, and I once again would like to recognise the prevention, education and awareness raising work that happens across our schools and communities by so many of those same organisations: Scottish Women's Aid, Close the Gap, Zero Tolerance, In Gender, Rape Crisis Scotland and all the rape crisis centres, those same organisations that support...
I love how they include Close the Gap in and amongst all those other organisations that are more relating to rape and whatnot. Close the Gap, if I'm not mistaken, is the organisation that is specifically set up to, you know, generate 50-50 representation in STEM and Parliament, etc., closing the gap, you know. And the fuck's that got to do with rape and what? Oh, I forgot, you know, because they're all intertwined. Fuck's sake, like. But, you know, as Maggie Chapman, I just thought I'd let her spattle on her usual shite. You know, she always talks about oppression and patriarchy and whatnot. You know, every speech is... It's always a blast when Maggie Chapman takes to the stand. You know, I'm in two minds about whether or not to continue listening to her, because obviously when I get big bad boy Ben McPherson on, you know, the migrant bootlicker himself, he used to be the migration minister for Scotland. Oh, I'll never forget that video of him, or when he was on the radio and he was so desperate to get some more migrants here. And why? Because they pick our fucking fruit. Yes, that was big Ben bad boy McPherson. I've never seen him angry before though, and he gets really worked up in this video here, and I just think it'd be a splendid, marvellous way to finish off the evening, you know. All this talk of violence against women and girls. Let's get an angry, bald homosexual onto it. Really spice things up.
Providers of violence. We also have a role to play in that culture change. And I challenge all the men in this Parliament, all the men MSPs that are role models in their communities, to look critically at their own behaviour. All men have a responsibility in this. A responsibility to act. A responsibility to check their own behaviour in work, in social, private and intimate settings. A responsibility to call out sexist behaviour and language whenever they encounter it, including in their own heads.
You know, I was obviously raised right because I don't really need to do any of these things because I don't have any of these issues personally, you know. I'm not saying I was an angel as a teenager, but again, the girls I associated with back then were far from fucking angels either. But, as I've grown up, I have grown up to respect women, the whammons, of course, and I don't need to check any of my behavioural tendencies and whatnot. And I would probably say confidently that the vast majority of other men my age and whatnot could say the same. Again, specific men act a specific way because they're not wired up right. But let's just keep talking about the patriarchy because for some strange reason it reaffirms the shite that the Green Party profess. You know, all that woman, man, whatever she is Nicola Sturgeon with a slightly fatter top lip and a longer fucking neck. Anyhow, let's get Ben on for I go to my bed.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And first of all, I want to thank all colleagues who have given such remarkably thoughtful, moving, courageous and emotive contributions this afternoon, and summing this debate up is very challenging because of the sheer power of what's already been said. Before I go on to refer to what others have brought up during this important debate and also to give some thoughts of my own, I also want to mention one person who's absent, and that's my colleague Christina McKelvey, the Minister for Equality and Older People, who has been a mainstay of this debate in tackling its subject and also been a driving force of the progress that we have made in addressing its blight on Scotland. And we wish her well in her recovery and look forward to welcoming her back from her medical leave.
I don't know what's wrong with Christina McKelvey, but she's in a non-article. For that much too.
As we've heard during the debate, violence against women and girls is a blight on our country as well as globally. And today we remember all the victims. All the victims. And we reaffirm our collective determination to do more to tackle violence against women and girls in all its forms. Part of that is about legislation. And one of the most important things we did in the last parliamentary term was pass the Domestic Abuse Act 2018, giving greater police powers to tackle this insidious crime. We also passed the Domestic Abuse Protection Scotland Act 2021, And when it comes into effect, this will provide new powers for the police and courts to make emergency orders designed to protect people who are at risk of domestic abuse from someone they are living with. And the independent working group, chaired by Baroness Helena Kennedy QC, to specifically look at misogyny in Scotland and explore whether there should be a standalone offence to tackle misogynistic behaviour, continues its work. I appreciate a number of members, in particular Megan Gallagher, raised points around the criminal justice system, and I'm sure my colleagues Keith Brown and Ash Denham will explore these in more detail next week in the debate we have then. Others have also talked about and absolutely rightly emphasised their thanks and praise for all the organisations working to tackle and prevent violence against women and girls and support victims, particularly moving contribution from Elena Whittam. And the Scottish Government absolutely recognises that. And over the past 18 months, we have invested an additional £10 million to allow rapid redesign of services and address backlogs, supporting organisations such as Scottish Women's Aid and Rape Crisis Scotland and Zero Tolerance. And also, I think Pam Gossel made really important points around the specific organisations working in minority communities, and I know that from my experience as a constituency MSP with Sikhs on Jog and Shakti Women's Aid and Sahelia, to name but a few. As part of our £100 million investment, which is a 3-year commitment to tackling violence against women and girls, we've also created a new Delivering Equally Safe Fund, which is about £19 million each year until 2023, and have recently confirmed allocations to 121 projects from 112 organisations working to provide key services and prevent gender-based violence. And the longer funding commitments that Beatrice Wishart talked about will be considered as part of the frontline services review that the Cabinet Secretary talked about. Presiding Officer, the most significant point that was raised, one of the most significant points raised today was about how we change culture. And I spoke earlier about how we miss Christina McKelvey today. But in her absence, I feel privileged to have the chance to speak in this debate because, as colleagues Jim Fairley, Neil Gray, Alexander Stewart and others in the debate emphasised, as allies, and as the CabSec has emphasised as well, men need to speak up and act. Because, of course, the fault and cause of violence against women and girls lies with men. And while some men, the perpetrators, are more to blame, all of us, all men, are responsible. Collectively, we are responsible for the society.
You see, and when they say this, that is the justification to then, in theory, influence education, for example, because every boy is equally at fault, or will be equally at fault as they grow older, the same way as every man currently is equally at fault. We're not equally at fucking fault, you bald wanker, and I'm sorry, I'm trying very hard now, as time really is marching on, almost a fucking 2-hour video here, but I'm trying to refrain from epithets to round off this video, but I mean, come on, like, I mean, it's just insufferable every fucking day. You don't need an excuse such as 16 days of activism to start waffling on about feminism. It's a talking point that never dies in the Scottish Parliament because the Parliament is riddled with feminism and feminists, including our First Minister. And if it's not that, it's BAMES. If it's not that, it's climate change. It's always something. It's always something. The only way that we can ever rectify the issues that they insist are everywhere is legislation and re-educating. It's the progressive worldview. It's such an unhealthy way to view the world, in fairness, because you see issues fucking everywhere. And you see things that are at fault for things that occur when there's no relevancy between the two or the three, etc. Such as misogyny and the patriarchy being major issues in Scotland, and that's why some guys act completely out of character or out of hand or out of order because they're wired up fucking wrong, but no, we're all to blame apparently. We all learnt the same thing in school, but for some reason Bob decided to become a fucking rapist, whereas the rest of us went on to have productive, to a certain extent in my case, lives. You know, funny, that's strange. We all learnt the same thing, but yet Bob's a rapist and I'm no. Fuck yourself, Ben McPherson.
We live in, and the underlying prejudices, sexism and misogynistic...
The underlying prejudices, misogynistic, societal attitudes that are still far too prevalent in some guys, and they go on to act upon it because they're fucking wired up wrong, you know. What about the people you're important, Benny boy, you know? Yes, we can't talk about that though, can we? And of course not.
Misogynistic societal attitudes that are still far too prevalent. Because it is only by prioritising prevention can there be an end to violence against women and girls. And as the motion states, gender-based violence, which includes but is not limited to domestic abuse, rape, harassment and sexual violence, is a function of gender inequality and an abuse of male power and privilege. Gender-based violence is a manifestation...
What fucking power do men have at this day and age in society? Really, what power do men have? If men still hold the power within Scotland, which I beg to differ, it's a power that's hanging by a thread. The power balance, the shift in power is well and truly headed towards the female end of the spectrum if it's not already firmly there, which I would argue it is. But, you know, this shit, it's all due to... Gender-based violence is due to a manifestation of toxic masculinity. You know, and abuse of male power. You know, fuck off, male power. What are you talking about, man?
Of toxic masculinity. The commodification of women, porn culture, and an immoral set of attitudes of sexual entitlement that are still held by too many men in our society and around the world. It is men who have created the injustice and imbalance in our society today. And so men have an ethical and urgent necessity and responsibility to lead the change we need to see, with solidarity, empathy, and in partnership to bring about the better society that we need to create. And this needs to be across the generations. And I just want to also pay tribute to my predecessor, Malcolm Chisholm, who has been and continues to be a really strong voice on this issue. Because what is clear, Presiding Officer, is that guys, and I mean men in that, the problem is ours, all of ours, younger and older, friends and partners, brothers, fathers, grandfathers. Because to address this problem in the way that we need to, the change required needs to be societal, behavioural, cultural and systematic. Because to effectively and comprehensively tackle gender-based violence, society must challenge and alter the still too prevalent and outdated gender stereotypes and social attitudes towards women and girls that enable it to continue. Men, we need to look in the mirror and to do so critically, as Maggie Chapman rightly emphasised, and to ask how do we do better, individually and collectively. We need to stand up more often to what we hear and see other men say and do, as Jim Fairley emphasised, and do so with courage and conviction to change minds, challenge behaviour, champion equality and call out misogyny. As men, we must do better at challenging and criticising ourselves and each other, and to do so not just in person but also online. Because, and this is important, and was rightly emphasised during the debate as well, women and girls should not have to modify their everyday behaviour in order to stay safe. Men, the onus is on us to modify our collective behaviour, and to do so in a way that is more sensitive about the situation women around us face day in, day out. As a recent Police Scotland campaign highlights, we have to not be that guy. Not be that guy who's sexist, not be that guy who's abusive, not be that guy who's misogynistic, be that guy who harasses women and girls, but also not be that guy who ignores this. And that's why today I've signed the White Ribbon Pledge and encourage other men to do so too. But because we can and should do more proactively. Men, guys, today and over the next 16 days and beyond, let's be that guy who does more to tackle and prevent violence against women and girls. Let's be that guy who calls out our mates when you hear or see sexism, misogyny, abuse or harassment. Let's be that guy who modifies our behaviour to make women feel safer. Let's be that guy who is part of the change in culture that we need, and be that guy who makes a positive difference in our circles of influence and in everyday life. Presiding Officer, as a Parliament, as one, today we mark the International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls, which is beginning the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence. We are united in condemnation of violence against women and girls in all its forms, in Scotland and around the world, and we speak with one voice. And we reaffirm our commitment to continue to work collaboratively to eradicate gender-based violence. And what's more, we call on all of Scotland to do the same, so that together we eradicate violence against women and girls across our country, in communities and workplaces, in bars and nightclubs, in homes and in the streets and online, and in all the places where sexism, harassment, misogyny and abuse are still far too prevalent. Presiding Officer, as others have said in a remarkable debate full of really moving speeches, we must and will do more. And I urge Parliament to support the motion in that sense of solidarity. Thank you.
Well, I just thought I would let him prattle on without me putting too much more in the way of input, as this video is fucking ridiculously long, and I don't even think anybody will watch the duration of this, but I'm going to upload it anyway. I might as well. I'm just wasting. I wouldn't say I wasted it. I mean, there was a lot of things that, as you've seen firsthand, if you did get to this point in the video, that I obviously wanted to talk about. But sadly, if I had like a better editing software and whatnot, I would just half the video and upload it in 2 parts or something. But the only way that I could realistically do that is to re-record the video and then pause it at the bit that I wish to end the first part. I'm fucking not doing that. You're having a laugh, like. But you know, to summarise there again, it's like they keep tying in things that I just don't think are synonymous, such as, you know, education, etc. Needs to be changed, outdated stereotypes, misogyny, the patriarchy, all that bollocks, but then they'll tie it into like domestic violence and things such as this, or, you know, rape and whatnot. These are issues that, yes, need to be addressed, highlighted, and obviously anything that can be done to make the justice system easier, accessible, less of a worry for women or whomever needs to access it. You know, things such as that, or, you know, like, I'm not against measures such as that, but I fundamentally disagree with the feminist narrative that permeates through the course of these debates, quote unquote, and that is that all boys are equally at fault, not through any fault of their own, but because of the education and the outdated stereotypes and attitudes that they're presented with at a young age, because it is opening the door for the likes of Thin Lips to go, oh well, it's time for some feminist inspired education, you know, the United Nations, courtesy of the United Nations, we're going to empower little girls. Not that they're not doing that anyway, for fuck's sake, but it's like, it seems to me it's a sort of plea to sort of accelerate these changes, this agenda. So, you know, I'm no way belittling any woman who is the victim of any form of domestic abuse or murder. Obviously, I'm obviously not doing that. I think these are grotesque things that occur. But again, it's not just women that are the victims of said things, such as rape or murder or domestic abuse. Obviously, they are more likely to be raped, more likely to be the victim of domestic abuse, but they're not more likely to be murdered. So it's men, I'm pretty sure, anyway, or used to be. Not that it's a competition, I'm just saying that I think if they focused more on issues in general without fucking putting a feminist spin on it, they would have had my sympathy, realistically. You know, and as I mentioned earlier on, things such as the drug death crisis, homelessness, suicide, you know, these are all male issues. Realistically, we're going to go down that route, but they're not addressed as male issues. And in fact, they're so cancerous in the Scottish Parliament that when it comes to such things such as homelessness, they actually seem to prioritise or talk more about homeless women. They want them off the street. And that's not just a Scottish issue, that's an issue in the UK, I'm pretty sure. I've seen similar rhetoric coming out of England before, you know, homeless women. You know, it's like, even though men are the bulk of homeless people, that they seem to be disregarded or glossed over or just included in the issue as a whole, which is fine, but don't do this with things such as this. Stop making things feminist issues, you know. And the same thing's applicable with the hate crime bill. Sex is not going to be included. Misogyny will be. Why not misogyny as well? If it's all about equality, then realistically both sexes should be included within the bill, if you're going to go down that route. But they're not doing that. And this is what annoys me. This fucking progressive shit. These cancerous wankers and their ideology. It's just, you know, women are oppressed and, you know, men can never be the victim. Men hold the power. Men are the oppressed. White men are the oppressors. And whatnot. Okay, give them the benefit of the doubt. There was a few that mentioned BAMEs and the BAME communities in this. So I can't just say white men, but 9 times out of 10 is white men. But in this instance, men cannot be the victims. Men are at fault and men are the perpetrators, etc., etc. And that needs to be the case in order for the feminist narrative to thrive. You don't need some big brain hot take from some well-versed commentator to be able to tell you that. You can just deal with a fucking tutor who spent almost 2 hours of his miserable existence prattling on about the cancer that permeates Scottish society, and that is a United Nations dose of Sustainable Development Goal 5. I think it's number 5, gender equality. Of course. Of course. Anyway, I will leave on that note too. Until next time, like gay. Fucking peace. Kajikov.